Sometimes when we hear a gospel like we have just heard proclaimed, it becomes easy to pass judgment on some of the characters involved in the narrative of the story. For me, my judgment is on St. Thomas the Apostle. Thomas was supposed to be with the others, and if he had, he would have actually encountered the risen Lord in the evening hours of Easter Sunday, last week. But he wasn't there. Let's just sit with this for just a moment. Was he thinking twice about his allegiance to Jesus? Was he in deep sorrow and mourning? Was he angry, maybe even at Jesus? Maybe thinking to himself, boy, if you hadn't have said what you said, you'd be here today, Jesus? I wonder if he was just filled with emotions. And just where was he that night? Well, friends, I don't think there's any way we'll ever know this side of heaven. But what may help us is to put ourselves in his shoes and to ask what he needed to identify and to deal with as he's looking at his own emotional scars that he received from that whole several days of Jesus' horrible passion, his ugly death on a cross, and his being placed into a tomb. Recently, I heard a story about a young couple. He was a cook in a restaurant. Actually, he was a chef. And she was a patron who would come there for dinner and drinks every now and then. Well, one evening, as the restaurant was about to close, he came out to say hello to her and he struck up a conversation. Eventually, he asked for her phone number, and after a few days, he gave her a telephone call. For their first date, he offered to go to her house and to cook a really nice dinner for her. After the restaurant closed one particular evening, he came with a full bag of fresh groceries, knocked on the door, and he went into the kitchen to work. She sat there at the counter and just watched him and learned as he was chopping and slicing and mixing and sautéing. But she was taken back. As she was watching him, she could see his arms. And his arms were all scarred and have different abrasions under his arms and on top of his arms. Likely they were from hot kettles and maybe frying equipment or other things which had badly burnt him. In fact, he had one scar that went from about the wrist almost to the elbow. She looked at that and she said, "Hey, hold it. You should put something on that," she said. "Nah, it's going to scar." He looked at her and said, "Sometimes scars are good. They remind us of what we've done." She says, "Well, yours are a little bit misleading. You look like you've been in hand-to-hand combat." He says, "Well, in some ways, I guess I have. Every night I'm in that kitchen and I fight for what really matters to me." And she looked at him. "Fight? What, fight for a job?" she said. No, he said. "Not a job. I'm fighting for a dream. You see, my dream is that in the future, I'm going to open my own restaurant. That's where I'm going to write the menu. It's going to be my place where I can call the shots and I can provide for my future family one day. I'll stand in my kitchen where I'll help to instruct some other young adults as to how to cook or what to cook. And then I'll take a good look at my scars and I remember everything that it took to get here." Dear friends, we all have our scars that continue to teach us and to define us. some scars remind us that we have to be careful and we have to be attentive. But there are many other scars that any of us could bear that are the result of becoming more conscious of others. Scars that are the result of growing in wisdom and in understanding. Scars that are the result of paying the price for creating and building what is good and valuable in our lives. Some scars are actually okay. In this second Sunday of Easter, also called Divine Mercy Sunday, we celebrate the scars from our own Good Fridays that remain after our own experiences of the resurrection. The nail marks in our own hands remind us of all the pain and the grief. They remind us of the ridicule and the suffering that any one of us has had to go through or may in the future go through. It reminds us of all of our disappointments and our anguish. And these scars that you and I bear are transformed into healing and peace in the love of God that we experience from others and that we can extend to them. Jesus acknowledges the hurt and the fright that Thomas and his fellow apostles experienced over those previous days. And I think this is really important, that Jesus acknowledged those emotions that these poor men suffered because it was important for their healing. He understands them, not just with his brain. Jesus knows these men with his heart and his emotion. There's an emotional connection. He wants them to no longer be afraid of the nail marks and the scars that crushed spirits that they possessed. Because from now on, as opposed to before the resurrection, from now on, Jesus will continually be with them in a new and a far more profound way. Friends, compassion, forgiveness, justice, no matter how clumsily we may offer those can become profound moments of healing and mending. Now, with that, I want to express a very personal invitation for any of you, if not all of you, to consider coming to confession today from 2 to 3 p.m. But this is a special invitation for any of you who have not had the chance to go to confession sometime during Lent or during Holy Week. If you have not had that chance, I want to ask you to consider coming back here to church and to avail yourself for this precious sacrament. And we'll stay even beyond 3 o'clock if we have to. We just have to cut off by 4:30 for Mass. But friends, the point of it is this. Some people withhold from the sacrament of reconciliation because they're afraid. Some of them may have bad memories from maybe a confession in the past, or maybe even just thinking of some of those sins that any of us could commit, or perhaps if we've been victimized by sin. Those things are sometimes so painful, it's hard to even talk about within the sacred space of confession. And for that, the heart of Christ especially goes out to you. In the light of unwavering hope, with the assurance of God's unlimited grace, even the simplest act of kindness and understanding, whether it's to your neighbor, to your right or to your left, or within the sacrament of confession, all that goodness is the realization that Easter is real. You can take it to the bank. I pray that if you need to go to confession, make the time today. That emotional connection with Jesus Christ, you can't pay for.